Someone must tell the usual suspects on the far left that the saying is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. You just lost a crazy contest to an actual crazy person. What a shocker that the people who see everything through the lens of race and sex see their election loss as a result of racism and sexism.
I know that as a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, but it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist.
I would say to Bill Maher, who I like, whose show I've been on several times, that maybe, just maybe, when you live life as a woman and as a woman of color, you feel it and you know it a little bit more than a white man does in America.
Bill Maher just ignited a full-blown political firestorm with his latest takedown of The View, calling out what he sees as their unhealthy obsession with identity politics and their distorted reading of America's political reality. In a heated live-on-air clash, the panelists went on the defensive, standing by their positions on racism, sexism, and voter behavior. But Maher didn't pull a single punch. He accused the left of drifting dangerously out of touch with average voters by clinging to ideological narratives instead of addressing real-world concerns like the economy, jobs, and public safety. What followed was a chaotic collision of worldviews, part debate, part culture war, leaving audiences sharply divided over who's truly out of step with America. Today, we're unpacking the fiery exchange and what it says about the deep fractures shaping our political discourse.
The Wall Street Journal claims that the shift to the right in this election reveals that Americans view themselves as belonging to a particular economic class more than their race and gender. And Bill Maher said it's not the only thing Democrats got wrong. Take a look.
Someone must tell the usual suspects on the far left that the saying is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. You just lost a crazy contest to an actual crazy person. What a shocker that the people who see everything through the lens of race and sex see their election loss as a result of racism and sexism. If we weren't so irredeemably unenlightened, we would have elected a black president by now. Oh, what, we did? Asked if racism is built into our society. White progressives agreed with that, at higher levels than black and Hispanic people. They don't want your pity. And black people can't afford to indulge rich white people's need to endlessly flagellate themselves. They just want prices to go down and good jobs and the police when you call them.
Well, if he's right, then why didn't people vote for the former prosecutor who actually had policy plans to help the working class? Again, I got my popcorn. I don't know why people did what they did. I see all these reasons, and so, okay, time will tell. But what do y'all think?
I know that as a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, but it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist, even if your lived experience doesn't tell you that it exists. And, the facts support that. I think we have a graph. If you look at there's a clear racial divide in who voted for Trump as opposed to who voted for Kamala Harris. It's very clear. It's not only clear by race, but it's also clear by education. And so the notion somehow that is not true. This is by education. Those who attended college voted for her at a higher degree than those that didn't.
Bill Maher didn't hold back in his blistering critique of the far left, accusing them of locking themselves into a self-destructive loop of identity politics. Maher argued that Democrats are losing voters by relentlessly framing election results through the prism of racism and sexism, rather than focusing on the kitchen table issues that actually sway elections, like wages, inflation, and safety in communities. In his trademark blunt style, Maher told the progressive elite to stop digging the hole deeper and start reconnecting with the everyday concerns of Americans who feel ignored predictably. His remarks sent shockwaves through The View, where Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg immediately went on the offensive. Hostin doubled down, insisting that racism and sexism remain deeply embedded in American life, a reality she says is far more visible to women of color than to white men like Maher. she tied Donald Trump's support base to lower education levels and racial divides, drawing a sharp contrast with Kamala Harris's backing among college-educated and racially diverse voters. Goldberg, meanwhile, blasted the dismissal of identity politics, arguing that it erases systemic inequalities and blinds people to the root causes of injustice. For both hosts, Maher's comments were just another example of what they see as a refusal to face the uncomfortable truths marginalized communities live with every day, turning the conversation into one of the most polarized and emotionally charged moments the show has seen in months.
The point is they didn't vote for him because of racism and misogyny. They voted for him because they felt like, I think the biggest common denominator in this election is people want a good life and ability to provide for their family.
Well,
and whether we agree or not with Donald Trump's plans,
Black people
they thought that he was
one of the
reflective.
poorest demographics in this country, but they voted for Kamala Harris.
Such a desire. If you really think the vast majority of this country voted because of racism and misogyny,
I didn't
you're
say the
missing
vast-
it. Most of my family, a lot of my family doesn't have college
but
degrees.
the stats are the stats.
But that's not, it doesn't say I'm
they're-
white, I voted for Donald Trump because of racism.
That's
not
you
what
can't-
stat. What
you
stat
can't
are you talking
Let me
about?
just dissect the
Yes,
two.
you can.
Wait,
There's a lot
Hold on, a breath.
Well,
Take a beat.
well, let me jump in here because I
Yes.
think, Sonny, what you say is valid, and I think absolutely that is part of the problem. But when we hang our hat on that's the only problem, or
No
the
one's
main,
saying it's the only.
I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying the backlash is that when people hang their hat on that being the only reason, any criticism of Vice President Harris must be because she's a woman or she's black. I voted for, thank you, I voted for Hillary Clinton, qualified. I voted for Vice President Kamala Harris because more of my values fell in line with what she stood for. So all of that can be true. There is something here to the socioeconomic class, though, that is crossing racial divide in academic and education, too. Americans with a college degree 30 years ago were roughly 20% of the population and held the same percentage of household wealth as those without a degree. 30 years later, this is important, Americans with a college degree account for 38% of the population and 73% of the household wealth. The haves and the have-nots have gone so far apart that they are rising up right now and they cross every line of our democracy.
The conversation soon widened into a bigger and far more uncomfortable truth. America's political divide now runs straight through education and class. College-educated voters increasingly lean left, while those with less formal education gravitate toward conservative candidates. This divide has only deepened with changes in wealth distribution, as college graduates now control a disproportionate share of household income, fueling resentment among working-class Americans who feel shut out. Critics of the modern university system claim it's less about teaching practical skills and more about producing graduates steeped in progressive ideology, a perception that has hardened conservative distrust. Against this backdrop, shows like The View are under growing fire for sidelining conservative viewpoints while promoting liberal narratives without meaningful counterbalance. Recent rumors that The View might bring on a pro-Trump host sparked immediate skepticism. Many doubt such a person would be allowed to speak freely, with critics warning that any so-called conservative presence would likely be tokenism rather than genuine ideological diversity. This controversy cuts to the heart of a bigger problem. How can America foster authentic political debate in a media environment built on echo chambers, ideological conformity, and an audience that increasingly expects to hear only what it already believes?
Look, I think most people are not saying that it was all about sexism and it was all
No one's saying
about
that.
people are not saying that. I would say to Bill Maher, who I like, whose show I've been on several times, that maybe, just maybe, when you live life as a woman and as a woman of color, you feel it and you know it a little bit more than a white man does in America. And so I'm not saying, he says that folks see everything through the lens of racism and sexism. Not everything. But if you're not seeing racism and sexism in America, then you need to clean your lenses.
But if I can
Because,
point-
this is something that I find interesting, that when Democrats and liberals talk about race or sexism, it's immediately labeled as identity politics, which has a negative connotation. It's a term that Republicans have coined, and it's been very effective.
The clash over racism and sexism drove home just how far apart the two sides are in even defining these issues. Bill Maher argues that progressives too often treat criticism as inherently racist or sexist, sidestepping the policy debate entirely and pushing away potential allies. In his view, this reflexive labeling deepens political silos and makes real conversation impossible. The hosts of The View see it very differently. To Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg, racism and sexism are structural forces woven into every part of American life, from the voting booth to public policy, and ignoring them only keeps those inequalities alive. The identity politics debate also exposes a double-edged hypocrisy. Democrats accuse Republicans of pandering to minority groups like Cuban or Arab voters, while critics argue that identity politics has become a catch-all term used to discredit any outreach to those communities at all. The problem: the term itself has been overused, misused, and weaponized to the point where it no longer sparks discussion. It shuts it down. And in today's climate, that's exactly why both sides are talking past each other instead of tackling the hard, substantive issues that actually affect Americans' lives. When political discourse turns into a battle of labels, truth and nuance are the first casualties.